Blog Talk Radio.
Readers Entertainment Radio presents Booklights with your host, author Lisa Kessler. Booklights, where we're shining a light on good books.
Hello, everyone. I hope spring has sprung wherever you are and the flowers are blooming and things are warming up. And I'm so glad that you're here if you're listening live or if you're listening later. We appreciate it. Today, we have sci-fi fantasy author Edward Willett on, and he has so many irons in the fire. I can't wait for you guys to meet him and hear about all the exciting book things he has coming up. If you haven't read his books before, I will read you his little bio here so you can get to know him. Edward Willett is an award-winning author of more than 60 books of sci-fi, fantasy, and nonfiction for both children and adults. He's also the author of the Aurora award-winning podcast, The Word Shapers, Conversations with Sci-Fi Fantasy Authors About the Creative Process. And I did put a link for that right on the Blog Talk page. So if you're listening live or listening later, you can check that out. He also successfully has kickstarted and edited a few new anthologies, The Shapers of Worlds, featuring authors who were guests during his podcast. Besides being a writer, Edward Willett is also a professional actor and singer and publisher. He has performed in dozens of plays, musicals, and operas around Saskatchewan. He's hosted local TV programs and emceed numerous public events. He's married to a telecommunications engineer and has one daughter and a black Siberian cat named Shadowpaw, who also is the name of his new press publishing house. You can find out more about him at his website. I did, again, put that right there on the Blog Talk site. So if you're listening live or listening later, you can check that out and sign up for his newsletter and check out all the content there. So many great books. So without any further delay, are you there, Edward?
I'm here.
All right. It's great to have you back on the show. I looked back, and it's been a couple years. What have you been doing?
Oh, what have I been doing? Well, among other things, as you mentioned, the publishing company, which is started out as, just this little thing I was doing because I had a couple of projects, and I think I'm publishing about 16 books through Shadowpaw Press, and I have another one called Endless Sky Books, which is more of a publishing services company. So all in all, I think I'm putting out 20 books this year. Just me and the cat, Shadowpaw. His picture's on every book, so that's his reward. And then of course on the writing side, well, the publishing has cut into the writing, but I've been doing I put a short story in every one of those anthologies you mentioned, and I've had a couple other short stories, and my last novel came out in late 2022, science fiction novel, The Tangled Stars, which would have been after we last talked, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm working on something new, but it's still in the, I've written 100 pages, and now we'll see what my agent thinks kind of stage.
Well, I wanted to talk about, I think The Shaper of Worlds Volume 4 just came out this year, right?
Yeah, it was kickstarted a year ago, but it came out, it went to backers in the fall, but it came out commercially January 24th.
And that one looks like it has a new short story from Sherilyn Kenyon and a whole bunch of other authors. Do you have any highlights from that you want to tell people about, why they should go grab it?
Oh, well, the Sherilyn Kenyon one is a lot of fun. It heads things off, partly because she's Sherilyn Kenyon, but also because it's a story about an editor that's haunted by an author. That seemed like a fun thing for the editor to put in as the first story in the book. And then the last story in the book by Michael Brent Collings is really touching. I really like that one a lot, and I recommend it. But they're all good. The other one by David Liss, Gail Z. Martin's in there, Josh Palmatier, James Van Pelt. I mean, it's just, it's hard to pick out one because they're all great. Lavi Tidhar has a reprint in there. Now I've mentioned half the authors.
And the other like a great lineup.
The other new thing about it is that it's also illustrated. I did that for the first time last time. Wonderful Calgary artist Wendy Nordell created a black and white illustration for each title, and the authors love them, and I love them too. And so she'll be illustrating The next one, assuming that it funds here, because we're in the middle of the Kickstarter for that right now.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So Volume 5 of Shaper of Worlds is up on Kickstarter now. And if people back it, what kind of cool things, what kind of rewards do they get?
Well, there are lots and lots of e-books. There are print books, autographed print books. There are some audio books. There's a few unique items like a brooch that ties into books by Richard Sparks. And then there are opportunities for online chats, Zoom chats with authors. Nobody has taken any of those yet, so that'd be a great thing to latch onto.
Yeah.
And then at the higher level, there's what are called Tuckerizations, where you can have your name used as a character either in a story that's going to be in the anthology for some of them. Future work in the case of Lawrence M. Schoen, he said he's already written his story, so it'll be for something he does down the road. One author, Brad C. Anderson, is offering the opportunity for couples, like a male-female couple. He's got two. He'll take up to 4 people, 2 couples. The first one gets to, I think the first one gets to be the heroes, and the second one gets to be the villains, or vice versa. I don't know. And then higher up than that, there's Aidan Trenholm is offering a mentoring package, and I'm offering mentoring and book editing. And at the very, very top, I offer for $3,500 Canadian, I offer a 3-month mentorship. Nobody's ever taken that, but it only takes one to really make my day. So. Right.
Well, and tell people, because I was actually I looked it up ahead of time in Volume 2 of World Shapers, and when it was on Kickstarter, it was fun because all of the authors were spreading the word. And how does that affect, what goes into the book? Because you made a real chunky, I have it on my shelf, of Volume 2 of all of those stories. It's a lot of stories, and you pay every author. So what else are you using the money for?
Well, basically, I set it at 12,000 Canadian. All that covers really is the author and the illustrator. And that depends on how long their stories are. I might even be a little under on what I really need at 12,000. I pay 10 cents a word Canadian, which is about 7.5 cents a word U.S. for original stories, and half that for reprints. And after that, then I just bear the brunt of whatever else is required to get the book out, on the theory that in the long tail I will eventually at least break even and hopefully make a little money on them. They keep selling. I mean, the first one, Shapers of Worlds Volume 1, it sells copies every month, and all of them do sell a few copies every month. So they're kind of evergreen. They're not going to go, they're not dated in any way. They'll just always be there. So anybody that buys one might want to go back and buy the other ones as well. And then I do have an opportunity, because here in Saskatchewan we do have good support from an organization called Creative Saskatchewan for book publishers. And so some of the funding for producing the book will come, hopefully, through a book production grant through Creative Saskatchewan. And so that way I make it happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. And adding illustrations is really cool, because I don't think Volume 2 was illustrated. I love that you are raising money for that too, because for readers, because I'm a big reader, I love when there's, some kind of image for me to keep in my head while I'm reading the story.
I set that up as a stretch goal last year, and we didn't quite get there. Then I ran a separate crowdfunder campaign, which is a different sort of crowdsourcing company, I guess. And was able to hire the artist. And this year I just built it in. I said, well, I'm going to have it illustrated. I can't go back to having it not illustrated now.
Right.
On one like that. And also, I didn't mention it, but the artist happens to be my niece. So,
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yeah, she's very, very talented. She's done. I hired her. The first book she did, she illustrated my science fiction and fantasy poetry collection, which is called I Tumble Through the Diamond Dust. And they were so good that the publisher of that immediately started using her for other books. And now she's illustrated several books for 2 or 3 Saskatchewan publishers, and she's doing mine. And yeah, so it was great to give her that opportunity to get into book illustration, and now she's doing quite a lot of it. So I'm very happy to have her doing mine as well. And the authors all loved her work in Shapers of Worlds Volume 4.
Oh, that's really cool. I love that. And you had, at least in Volume 2, you had mentioned that your anthology is like a cabinet of curiosities, which I have always thought was a great description of these, because these stories aren't, you allow authors, or at least you did allow authors to choose their subject, so every story people can expect something totally different, right?
Yes, it's not a themed anthology in the sense that, for example, I just wrote a story for there's a company called Zombies Need Brains run by Josh Palmatier, who's a fellow DAW author, and he set that company up quite a while ago, and he does 2 or 3 anthologies a year, which he kickstarts, and they're all themed. So I did one that was, what would the gods be doing if they were around in our world today? And I had the, I guess it's the Sumerian goddess of beer, and of course she's running a brew pub and that sort of thing. So those kinds of themes, and I have another one coming up that's a spy thing about last ditch effort. It's called Last Ditch. It's that last ditch effort to save the world by some sort of spy. So those are all themes, but my only theme is that I interviewed all these people on the podcast. And,
right.
That means it's what I call an author showcase. I've used various metaphors. You mentioned the Cabinet of Curiosities.
Yes.
I think in Shapers of Worlds Volume 4, I compared it to a potluck dinner, where everybody
nice.
brings their favorite dish, and it makes a satisfying meal as a whole. So, it is interesting because you'll get, sometimes it's young adult stories, including my own in the first one. Sometimes it's fantasy, sometimes it's science fiction. It can be hard science fiction, near future science fiction, far future science fiction. It can be urban fantasy or sword and sorcery or just weird. So
Yeah, I love that. And for me as a reader, that's sometimes really fun because you finish a story and then it's a huge shifting gears when you get to the next one, which makes it really fun.
And it's, I hope, exposes people to stories they might not otherwise read and authors they might not otherwise read, and hopefully it goes back to help out the authors as well.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your podcast for people who have never listened to the World Shapers podcast. Can you tell everybody kind of what it's about and how it began?
Well, back in 2018, I was starting a new series with DAW Books called World Shaper. And the whole premise is that there's people who are shaping worlds. They're all from our world, but they've been put into another, call it a dimension, I guess, where they can shape a whole world any way they want to. And so I thought, well, I've always wanted to do a podcast, and there's a great metaphor there for what authors do, shaping worlds, out of nothing.
Right.
So I decided, and I climbed the learning curve of running a podcast. All this stuff you have to learn a lot to do, like publishing.
Right.
It's amazing what you have to learn. So I did all that, and I managed to launch it at about the same time that the first book in the series came out. And I love talking to authors about how they write. So that was a natural, was to focus it on the creative process, science fiction, fantasy, because that was the field I knew. And because I've been in the field for a long time now, I was able to immediately bring in major authors. So my first 3 guests were Robert J. Sawyer, Tanya Huff, Julie Cerneda, and then John Scalzi. Those were my first 4 guests.
Wow.
And in that first season, I had David Brin and Joe Haldeman and Orson Scott Card and people like that. I went on to I've talked to Victoria Schwab, some real, and Sherilyn Kenyon, as we mentioned, all these really big names, Holly Black, over the years. I did it, and I'm still doing it, although I have changed the focus a little bit. As of beginning of this year, it became a video and audio podcast, so it's now on YouTube, partly because I have a YouTube channel which has finally gotten up past the 1,000 subscribers point, which means it gets monetized. So, hey, I'm making enough for a cup of coffee almost every day.
Wow, go you!
Yeah, I'll be retiring soon. And I'm also expanding it into other genres a little bit, and it's a bit more release-focused now than it was, but I always still talk about the process, because how can you not? So I'm also I've talked to thriller authors, and I'll talk talked to a nonfiction author. And one reason I did that was because now I can start to interview the authors of the books I'm publishing that are not science fiction or fantasy. So there was a good reason to do that, too. So I'm up to episode 166, I think, or 165 was the one I just released. And It's now weekly, so that number's going to pile up a lot faster because it used to be every 2 weeks.
Oh, that's exciting. Are you still writing the World Shapers book series?
No, it went 3 books, and then the third book came out. There was something else going on in the world. What was that? Oh, right, there was a pandemic, and that kind of.
Dang it.
I mean, it just killed everything, right? And so they didn't carry it on. However, I think I need probably at least 2 more books to really bring it to the conclusion because there is an overarching story.
Right.
Although I also designed it to be open-ended, it could have gone on for as long as I had ideas. So I am thinking that I might do a Kickstarter next year or this fall or sometime. That's not the anthology. I might try kickstarting my own stuff now that I've had 5 years of running Kickstarters and know what's involved. So we'll see. I hope to continue the series, but there's nothing firm at the moment. The next book is planned out. I just haven't written it.
Right. Well, maybe when you're not putting out 20 books a year, you'll have time to do that.
Maybe. Yeah, I won't be doing that next year. Next year I'll definitely have to step back, and if I manage to keep the publishing company going, it'll definitely have to take a bit of a hiatus, I think.
Right. Well, speaking of, your writing journey has really taken you to all kinds of exciting places that you never expected. But when you were starting out, did you always want to be a writer? How did it happen for you to get your first book published?
Oh, well, the first book getting published was a long way past starting being a writer.
Right.
I was a huge reader, and I wrote my first complete short story at age 11 as something to do on a rainy afternoon, and it was called Castor Glass Hypership Test Pilot. So you could see where my brain was at a very early age. And then in high school, I wrote longer stuff. I wrote kind of a novella-length thing called The Pirate Dilemma. And then I started writing novels. So I wrote 3 novels in high school, 2 fantasy, one a really stupid idea about a hidden technological, maybe it was Wakandan, I was ahead of things, a hidden technological civilization in the Amazon rainforest that somehow, even with satellites, nobody knew existed until our young protagonist got dragged there. So anyway, that was in high school, and then I just kept going, and I probably had a dozen novels written. Maybe not quite that many, but a lot of those written before I finally had one published. So I started at age 11, and I was 38 when my first novel was published.
Wow.
So I was one of those, like, yeah. And, of course, in those days, because I'm old, back in those days, there was no electronic submission, so everything went in your full manuscript went in a box and got sent off somewhere. And I remember once, 2 years, I was at a convention, and I'd sent it to Tor, and I finally met the editor there, and I asked, and somehow they'd lost it. So it had been, for 2 years it was out of circulation, and they had just misplaced it somewhere. So yeah, those are the good old days. I never gave up, and then even then I was published by a really publisher whose name should not even be mentioned, my first 2 books. And then some still small, but slightly better publishers, most of which went out of business after publishing me, but I try not to take that personally. And then I got picked up by Daw Books, and then I've done a dozen for them. So, and they're one of the major science fiction fantasy publishers in New York. So, but now I'm kind of in a different place because they got sold and my editor retired. So it used to be I could just talk to Sheila Gilbert, who's my editor at Daw, and I'd, here's an idea, and here's a synopsis, and she'd say, okay, and here's a contract, and then I'd write the book. And now that she's retired, I have to kind of do a new approach.
Like you have to start over, yeah.
Yeah, but I do have an agent and all that sort of thing, so we'll see what happens. And, of course, I have a publishing company, so I can always get stuff published.
Right, exactly. I love that there are more options now. When I first got published, self-publishing was just beginning, and so it wasn't even, I mean, unless you were technical, it was hard to put it all together. And so I can remember writing things going, what if this never sees the light of day? What if I never get, there was that pressure. And now I feel so much more creative because I feel like, well, if they don't want it, I can put it out myself. You know that your words can find readers. And as a writer, to me, it makes me willing to take chances. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think I will find that once I find more time to write again.
Once you have time to write.
I mean, one of the great things and one of the reasons I started the publishing company was because of those publishers who had died, and then the work came free, and I wanted to keep it out there. And I've done that for other authors. I have a reprint line, although as far as I can tell, there's not much market for reprints, unfortunately. So I may be backing off on some of that. But so it's like notable previously published work that, for whatever reason, there's a local publisher, Coteau Books, that published my young adult fantasy series, The Shards of Excalibur. They went bankrupt a few years ago, and so all those rights reverted to all their authors. And I've actually brought out new editions of several books that were originally published by Coteau, and I'm publishing a couple of literary short fiction collections in January that were accepted by Coteau but never published because Coteau went out of business.
Okay.
So the traditional side of things is like that, but if you can, and I tell people this now when I'm like writer in residence somewhere or whatever, I said, you can have this on Kindle in about 72 hours from now if you have a Word document,
Right, true.
Although I also urge them to not do that until it's been thoroughly edited and
for sure
and all that sort of thing. But it's just a whole different era than it used to be, and I think I'm always a little out of sync because this would be perfect for me, but now that it's out there, I'm too busy running a traditional publishing company.
I know, dang it.
Take as much advantage of the other side of things as I probably would have if I hadn't started a publishing company. So.
Well, I was going to ask you about that too. When did you decide, because publisher wears a totally different hat than a writer. And, you have to worry about the marketing and cover art and all this kind of stuff. How has that been for you? Why did you put on a different hat?
Okay, well, in 2018, I did want to self-publish a collection of my short fiction. And I also had my grandfather-in-law's First World War memoirs, which he wrote late in life. They were in the house, typed up manuscript. He just shared them with a few friends. And the centennial of the armistice was coming up in 2018. November 11th, 2018 was the 100th anniversary of the armistice of the First World War. And I wanted to get that out. I had put it online, and people had reacted well to it without any editing, but I wanted to do a proper job of it and put that out. And I was talking to a local publisher who said, no, she said, don't just put it out yourself. Start a publishing company. And so I did, and here I am. I haven't thanked her properly yet. And then for a while, it was very much, I had those two projects. And then I think for the first year, I was just some of those books that had been abandoned, orphaned, I guess is the word, when the publisher went out of business, I wanted to bring out. And I did. And then the anthology came along, and I was at a presentation of a publisher from Winnipeg who had done a Kickstarter and very successfully for an anthology. $100,000 she raised, which I've never come close to, but she had connections to the comics side of things, and they love their Kickstarters in the comics world.
Right.
So I said, hey, I know some authors, and so that was the anthology once I figured out Kickstarting. And so that came out through Shadowpaw Press. Well, now I had an original book, original fiction, made big names in it. And then from there, it just kind of grew. And I had the idea that, I'll do reprints because they're not as much work. Easy. I'll just do a reprint and make some money. But I realized that they're just as much work as doing, because I can't put them out without re-editing them. I'm incapable of putting something out that I haven't edited, I realized. So I did that, and then I had an author approach me, Matt Hughes, who said he had a short YA book he was looking for a publisher. Would I be interested? And I said, well, okay. And then I had an author when I was writer-in-residence at the Saskatoon Public Library whose book I'd quite liked, and I'd said, if you're interested, contact me. And she hadn't had luck elsewhere. It came to me. I put that out. It was nominated for Best First Book at the Saskatchewan Book Awards.
Wow.
And then it just grew from there. Then I put out a call for submissions. Well, that certainly brought stuff in.
Right.
And I've got I'm publishing science fiction, fantasy. This year I've got, on the new side, I've already published The Good Soldier by Nir Yaniv, which is military science fiction satire. The Headmasters by Mark Morton, YA science fiction. Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. Other new stuff coming up. The Downloaded by Robert J. Sawyer. Major release. His latest novel. A new book by Dave Duncan, the late great Canadian science fiction writer, that's was edited after his death and has come to me. I've got another one of his coming out later this year, a poetry collection, and that's not even mentioning the reprints. And then in the fall, I've also got Arthur Slade, Governor General Award-winning author, his new YA novel, YA fantasy, and 2 other science fiction novels, and a picture book. That's on the new side, and then there's some reprints in there as well. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Wow, I'm tired just listening.
I'm tired listening it. But I managed to stay on top of everything so far and make all my deadlines. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and speaking of deadlines, what is the deadline on this Kickstarter for Volume 5? Can people still get involved and
Yep. There are 17 days left. It ends on May 9th at noon my time, noon Central Standard Time or Mountain Daylight Time. It is at 8,600 and something as of this morning, so about short of 72% funded.
Good.
Out of 12,000. And as I said, lots of great rewards available. You can just go to Kickstarter, look up Shapers of Worlds, or you can use tinyurl.com/shapersofworlds5, numeral 5. Shapers of Worlds 5, tinyurl.com. We'll take you there as well. And as I said, lots of great rewards, and it's going to be a terrific collection of short stories again.
Oh, I'm so excited. So everyone go check that out on Kickstarter. And when they get excited, how can they connect with you? Are you on social media, or is your publishing
am I on
house?
social media?
How do they? I know.
Okay, well, I am at edwardwillett.com, as you mentioned. I'm on X at eWillett. I'm on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor. I'm on Facebook at edward.willett, because I missed the memo about having the same handle for everything. And I'm on YouTube at Edward Willett. And on YouTube, you can see the new video version of The World Shapers. And you can also walk around Regina, Saskatchewan with me on a regular basis. I do live stream walks around the city. There's also some of my singing and stuff. Shadowpaw Press is easier. It's Shadowpaw Press on everything, X, Facebook, and Instagram. And its website is shadowpawpress.com. And The World Shapers you mentioned is theworldshapers.com.
Oh, they have their own website.
The World Shapers?
Yeah, yes. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, the World Shapers has that, and every episode has its own web page with links to the author's social media and a bio and some cover art and all of that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well,
and the audio-only version of it continues, I should mention. It's not just video. The audio-only version is available through Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all those usual places.
Oh, nice. So everybody can go listen to the podcast. They can head over to Kickstarter and back Volume 5, and there are all kinds of great rewards still available. You can even be a character in someone's story.
The character in my story.
Yeah.
That's still open.
All right. And you can also go to Edward's website and grab some of his books. You can go to Shadowpaw Press and grab some books of other authors that he has published and republished. And it's so amazing that you have so much fiction up there coming out of Canada. It's inspiring.
Yay. I try to be inspiring.
Right, when you're not tired.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks so much for being here. It was great having you on again, and I can't wait to hear that the Kickstarter funded, and you're going to have more great new stories out there and new illustrations. It's very exciting.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Well, thanks for being here. I hope that you will come back and visit with us again.
I would love to.
Okay, talk to you soon, Edward.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for joining us on Booklights. Be sure to connect with us at www.readersentertainment.com for articles, blogs, videos, and podcasts that matter to readers.